In the second half of chapter 5, our attention in Ecclesiastes was turned to the ultimate worthlessness of this world's wealth. In numerous ways, we were shown that our help, our hope, is not found in the substance that we can grasp with our hands in this world. Wealth does not ultimately sustain us. It can't ease our conscience and give us a good night's rest. It is unreliable. And at the end of the day, it all has to be left behind. The first thing that was mentioned, however, about wealth was in verse 10 of chapter 5. And that was that wealth does not satisfy. It said there in chapter 5, verse 10, "He that loveth silver shall not be satisfied with silver, nor he that loveth abundance with increase. This is also vanity." So in the previous chapter, this theme of this idea of satisfaction, or the lack of it, was briefly touched upon. But now when you arrive in chapter 6, it comes very much to the fore. I'm sure at times you've noticed maybe a product that you can buy in the shop and it's advertised, or else you'll see it on the label. You'll see it says, "Satisfaction Guaranteed." And I think the idea is that if you don't like the product, if you're not satisfied, if it falls short of your expectations, you're meant to be able to send it back and receive a full refund. I don't know if you can always manage to do that. Sometimes they have the small writing that stops you, but that's the idea. Satisfaction guaranteed. You're going to find this product up to standard. Satisfaction guaranteed. Well, the whole point of chapter 6 is the opposite. As you come to Ecclesiastes chapter 6, we're still examining life lived under the sun, and especially the life that's lived without God. Life that's lived just for this world and for the stuff of this world. And the whole point of this chapter is that dissatisfaction is guaranteed. Dissatisfaction guaranteed. The preacher here holds out to us our life without God. And like one of the companies who would offer their product and put the sticker on it, Preacher Solomon here, he puts his label upon a life without God. And what is on the label? Dissatisfaction guaranteed. The flow of this whole chapter is really to argue that such a life without the Lord, is a life of dissatisfaction, of restlessness. It's a worthless, vain, empty life. Dissatisfaction guaranteed. Now, first of all, as we try to analyze this chapter, we're going to look at the examples of dissatisfaction. Really, there's a whole flow of argument going through this chapter, and we're just going to break it up bit by bit. First of all, the examples of dissatisfaction. The preacher begins here with a couple of miserable cases. First of all, he refers us to an evil, or a painful, a bad thing that he has seen under the sun. And something which he says is common. It's common among men. He's not telling us here about something totally obscure that would never happen. He's speaking about something that can be a common problem among men. We have a troubling case given to us in verse 2. He talks about a man to whom God hath given riches, wealth, and honour, so that he wanteth nothing for his soul of all that he desireth. Yet God giveth him not power to eat thereof, but a stranger eateth it. So we have an individual here who, on first glance, it doesn't seem to be much of an evil case. On first glance, this person seems to be made. They have an abundance of what this world would offer. They have wealth, they have riches, wealth in abundance. They even have honor. They have everything that they could want. They've got riches, they've got a good name. What more could they desire? In fact, it even says that this person, he wanteth nothing for his soul. Of all that he desireth, whatever this person has set their affections on, they're able to get it. They have access to it. They have the resources and so on. It's attainable. Doesn't seem like an evil case at all. Doesn't seem like a bad case at all. Seems like a very nice case. Except there are two significant problems. First of all, it tells us, God giveth him not power to eat thereof. So here's someone who has everything you could ever desire, but he doesn't have the ability, or he doesn't have the opportunity to make use of it. We're not told the reason. Maybe you could think of ill health. which sometimes limits someone's ability to do what they would like with their life. Probably the main point being made here is that this person is cut off by their death. That they attain everything. Everything they could have desired is gathered up by them, but then all of a sudden they're cut off in death. And being cut off, they can't use all these good things that they have. They never got the benefit out of it all. That's the first problem. The second problem, I suppose, ties in with that, is that this person seems to have no children. Rather than their goods being passed on to their children, and maybe you could say, well, there's been something worthwhile has come of it. Their children have the goods at least. Their children can benefit. Well, verse 2 tells us that a stranger eateth it. The person seems to attain everything they could desire, but before they can use it, they're cut off. And their family don't even get the benefit. It just goes to a stranger. They have everything, but they have no opportunity to use it and achieve satisfaction. I suppose as you think of that picture in Ecclesiastes, it's very, very similar to the picture that Christ took up in Luke 12 and verse 16. In fact, you could very well make an argument that Christ built that description from this. But in Luke 12 verse 16, he spoke about a rich man whose land had brought forth plentifully, and the man thought to himself, "What shall I do? Because I have no room where to bestow my fruits." And here's a man, he's saying, "I've got so much, I don't know what to do with it. I can't make use of it all. I'll stockpile it." He says, encouraging himself, "Soul, I will say to my soul, soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry." He builds bigger barns and stockpiles it all. And he says, yes, take your ease. You've got goods laid up for many years. All will be well. I've got a long life ahead of me to enjoy these good things. He's gained everything that his heart could desire. But, and it's a big but, he's not given the power to eat of it. Because as Christ continues on in Luke 12, he says, "God said unto him, Thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Then whose shall those things be which thou hast provided?" And it seems that that man didn't have any children either. God says, "I'm taking away your life this night. Your soul is required. Your opportunity to use all of this is gone. Now you've labored for them, you've worked for them, you've set your heart on them, and you can't use them." And it's not even as if family's going to get them. Whose are they going to be now? "You're a fool," the Lord says to him. And Christ applies that to us in Luke 12:21. "So is he that layeth up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God." Now, it's not the main point tonight, but it's worth remembering that you can work and work and work and achieve everything, maybe set aside an abundance for your retirement and live your life with that goal in mind, that you're just living for a cozy retirement, maybe like many do in Australia. Get yourself the caravan and tour the country, and that's what all your heart is set upon. And not that there's anything wrong with a retirement, but if that's where your heart is set and you've lived your life with that goal in mind and you neglect the Lord, well, you might get your retirement sorted out, but God might just say to you, "Thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. I'm going to remove your opportunity to use these things. You've stockpiled it all, but you can't use it." So how important to be rich toward God, with riches that endure, with riches found in Christ. Anyhow, that's the first example that the preacher gives us. And he rightly concludes that such a life is vanity. It's an empty life. Here's someone who has worked and worked and worked, and they've been restlessly striving to gain all this substance, and they've got it, but they can't use it. They've no power to use it. It's a vain, restless life. The second example that the preacher gives us is in verse 3. Now, this is more of an extreme, exaggerated example. He says, "If a man beget 100 children, and live many years, so that the days of his years be many, and his soul be not filled with good, and also that he have no burial, I say that an untimely birth is better than he." Now, as you think of that first man, that first example, here's someone who is in the extreme opposite position. he has a couple of things that in the ancient world were seen as tremendous blessings. He has a long life. It says there that he has many years. In fact, in verse 6, the preacher is going to describe, even if this man were to live 1,000 years twice told. So it's an exaggerated sort of picture of this. It's an exaggerated picture of this man. Even if he lives for 1,000 years twice told, even if he has a life of 2,000 years. So here's a man who has a long life. Make it as long as you like in your own mind. He doesn't get cut off like the other man. He doesn't die early and be unable to use his goods. He's got a long life to enjoy all that he has. On top of that, here's someone who has 100 children. Now again, it's hyperbole, speaking in a big number, and I know some of you are maybe thinking, oh, that doesn't sound like a blessing to me, that sounds like real trouble, and I imagine it would be certainly challenging in the household. But as Psalm 127 says, children are an heritage of the Lord. The fruit of the womb is his reward. It says, as arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are the children of the youth. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, they shall speak with the enemy in the gates. It's still the case today to some extent, but even more so back then. People generally delighted in a big family, in many children. People delighted in it. It was seen as a great blessing. Your name was going to be sustained. Prosperity was yours with children. It was a blessing. So here's a man who's blessed. He's got long life. He's got an abundance of children. The other man, he was cut off early. He had no children to leave his goods to. Here's a man who has a long life and an abundance of children. And yet again, there's a problem with this man. While he has those things that the other one lacked, this man doesn't have any goods. It says, his soul be not filled with good. We were told that the first man wanted nothing for his soul. He had everything. This man has nothing. His soul is not filled with good. Here's a man who has no opportunity to find satisfaction. He has a long life in which to use his goods, but he doesn't have any goods to use. And the point to understand here is that in presenting both of these cases, the preacher is, as in the whole of Ecclesiastes, he's challenging the idea that's held by many, that if we just live our lives for this world and strive to gain and use the things of this world, the riches that are around us, then we will be happy. That's a prevailing view among many. Happiness will be found if I just gain more of what's around me in this world, if I just increase my financial security, if I just get the better car and house, if I just get the more established family, that'll be my happiness. Well, the preacher here is really challenging this whole idea. And first of all, he tries to get us on side, if that's our thinking. But he shows us two men who have some blessings, but in both cases, they have no ability at all to satisfy themselves with the wealth of this world. The first man has the stuff, but no power to use it. The second man has the power to use it, but he doesn't have the stuff. And so for any of us, and even for those those that the preacher Solomon would be critical of, we would look at this and we'd say, these are both tragic cases. These are tragic cases. These are lives of vanity. Here's something that's very sad. A man with long life, but nothing to sustain him, really. Nothing to enjoy. Or the other man has it all, but can't enjoy it. These are sad cases. Tragic cases. And the preacher emphasizes the tragedy with his declaration at the end of verse 3. He says, I say that an untimely birth is better than he. And in comparison with these cases, these men which can't possibly find satisfaction in life, one with no power, the other with no goods, he says it would be better to have died before the birth, better never to have made it out of the mother's womb. And he goes on to explain what he means in the verses that follow. Talking about such a child who dies in the womb, he says they come into the world with nothing, with vanity. They depart in darkness. They never see the light of day, never know the sun or anything. And yet here's the key. Here's the key that he's really picking up on at the end of verse 5. He says, this, that is the child who dies in the womb, this hath more rest than the other. He's making a comparison here, and he's showing us two people who, for differing reasons, are going to have restless lives, always longing for more, never able to find it, always with an itch but never able to scratch it, restless. And for the child who's never made it out of the womb, never had to experience that restless, empty existence, he's saying they have rest right away. Now, Job echoed something of that thought in Job chapter 3. Obviously, if you're familiar with Job, he had so much and then he lost everything. He lost his business, he lost his children, he lost virtually everything, all his finances and all. And he said in Job chapter 3, verse 3, he said, let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night in which it was said that there is a man-child conceived. He went on to add in verse 11, why died I not from the womb? Why did I not give up the ghost when I came out of the belly? He says, for now should I have lain still and been quiet. I should have slept. Then had I been at rest. Job is saying, I'm in so much misery. In his case, he was in the midst of great tragedy. And he's saying, oh, that I had died in the womb. I would have been at rest. I wouldn't have had to face this dreadful pain, this suffering. I would have been at rest. He goes on to say he would have been at rest where the wicked cease from troubling, and there the weary be at rest. Now, I'm conscious, by the way, whenever we raise even just make mention of a theme like this, especially in Ecclesiastes, this comparison being made about the child dying in the womb, this can be quite an emotional and a hard portion of Scripture even to read for some if you have lost a child in the womb. You know, I'll just say in passing, Scripture doesn't speak explicitly about it, but you do have sections like these where it is seen to be positive, more positive to die in the womb than to live an unfulfilled, unsatisfied life like these men in Ecclesiastes, or to have had to suffer the pain that Job suffered. And certainly, while it's not explicit, what does seem to be implied there is that there is hope for that child in eternity, because they're said to enjoy rest, to have more rest than the other, that there is rest for that soul to enjoy. And that would certainly imply to us that in the mercy of God and through Christ, there is salvation, there is a place in glory for the child dying in the womb. So there is at least a trace of comfort here, I do believe, for those who have lost a child in those circumstances. But you know, the main point of the passage, the main point coming back to Ecclesiastes, the main point here is not so much to give comfort regarding such a case. The main point is simply to highlight the tragedy of a life like those two examples that were given. And the preacher is, although he's using very dramatic and extreme language here, the preacher is expecting his reader more or less to agree with his point. That in the case of someone who has everything and can't use it, or else in the case of someone who could use it but who has nothing, such a life is just vanity. It's just painful. It's just restless. And if that's all you have, then better not to have seen the light of day. Better just to have enjoyed rest straight away without having to proceed through this long or short, unfulfilled, miserable, painful life. And even if you live 1,000 years twice told, and yet you've seen no good, and you still go to death like the unborn child, seeing no good in this life, better just to have ended in the womb, rather than proceed through all the pain and the misery and never find satisfaction and never get anywhere. The expectation here is that we'll agree. Such a life, where it's impossible to find satisfaction in this world's goods, such a life is vanity. It's just empty. It's just worthless. Then we come to the real punchline of the argument. And we have revealed for us our second main point. And that is the universality of dissatisfaction. The universality of it, this is faced by everyone. The preacher has given us two examples. And he's expecting us, as I say, to agree with his examples. He's given us two cases where it's absolutely clear these people can't find satisfaction. They have no possible way to attain satisfaction. One has the goods but can't use them. The other has the power to use, but he doesn't have any goods. They can't possibly find satisfaction. We're meant to agree, yes, their life is vain because they can't be satisfied. But here's the punchline. As we arrive at verse 7, suddenly the preacher brings to our attention that there's not a single one of us that can find satisfaction in this world. You see, the reader of Ecclesiastes 6 might be tempted to say, well, yes, those two people's lives, they're vain, they're empty, they're worthless. Better not to have had to face that, but I'm different. You know, I have power to continue striving on for the things of this world, and I may well be able to use it, and I may well be able to satisfy myself with this world's stuff. I'm not like those two. The preacher here is saying, everyone is like those two men. He turns this principle upon us that just as it's impossible for those two men to find satisfaction, so it's impossible for you or for me or for any of us to find satisfaction in this world's stuff. He says in verse 7, all the labor of man is for his mouth, and yet the appetite is not filled. You know, we automatically know that what he says is true there. It's certainly the case regarding food, because we eat and yet we're going to get hungry again pretty quickly. But he's not just talking about food here, he's using this as the metaphor. He looks around and he sees that men everywhere work and work and work so as to gain certain things for themselves. We work to gain things that we think will help us and benefit us. We work so that we can consume those things and make the most of those things and satisfy ourselves with those things. But the reality is that for all of our labor, for all of our work, for all that we might actually gain, none of us ever actually fills the great appetite within us. None of us does. I think of my own memories of childhood. One of those times that really emphasizes this point was a time like your birthday or maybe Christmas. You know, those times when you're getting presents given to you. And there were many times where in the build-up to those big days, there was maybe one particular thing that I had my heart set on. Maybe one particular toy that I really wanted for Christmas. And I couldn't wait for the day to arrive, or for my birthday. And I couldn't wait for the day to arrive. And hopefully I would get given that thing that I'd asked for. And maybe you're waiting in the build-up to it, and you see the package coming into the house, and it's wrapped up, and it looks about the right size and shape, and you get your hopes up. Yes, that looks like it might be the very thing that I was wanting. And you wait for the big day. And then finally it is the day, and you get to open that present, you tear the wrapping paper off, and how wonderful, you're filled with excitement because it's just that thing that you'd wanted. It's just that perfect toy or whatever it is. So exciting, so wonderful. Except fast forward about a week or maybe two, maybe sometimes a little longer, and that same thing isn't really getting used at all. It's sitting there, and there's not the same excitement over it that there used to be. And now your heart is set on the next toy, or the next gadget, or the next whatever. And I'm sure you know that experience for yourself. That's what the preacher's describing for us here. We keep looking for the next horizon. Our appetite is never filled. Our desires are always wandering. Maybe for you it's not a toy anymore, but there are things that you're longing for, and in your own mind you attach great significance to them. You're no longer chasing after the doll or the new bike or the packet of lollies. Maybe you've got a bit older and you're restlessly trying to get satisfaction in good academic results, or in a job, or in a car, or in a spouse. And you're restlessly searching for some of these different things, and putting all your hope in it that will solve your problems, that's where joy will be for you, that's where satisfaction will be for you. Maybe for you who are married, you're restlessly looking for more children, or a better house, or something else entirely. And There's this temptation in all of us that we put all of our hopes into that thing, and if only we have that thing, that'll satisfy us. And all of those different things are good enough in their place. Nothing wrong with, desiring, what did I mention? Good academic results. Nothing wrong with seeking a marriage partner. Nothing wrong with seeking and praying for children. Nothing wrong with looking for a house that's suitable and so on. But none of these things satisfy. None of these things fill the appetite. Not fully, not properly. Not the way you need. Man's appetite is never filled. Often that's what also leads to so many sins in this world. People turn to all sorts of things, again, seeking to fill their appetite. There are those who maybe turn to alcohol, seeking satisfaction there, or endlessly check how many likes their latest post has got on Facebook, and they're seeking satisfaction in it. Or those who retreat to television and entertainment to try and find satisfaction in escaping real life. There are those who cheat on their husband or wife, thinking that the next person will fill the void. Some resort to theft, trying to get what they can't afford, thinking it will make their life better. And Satan, in so many areas, is very good at holding out the next sin to us, telling us that this thing is just what we need. That's what he did to Eve. That's what you need, Eve. You need the fruit from that tree. That's what you need. And he does the same to you and me. You feel the void there? Here's the answer, and he holds out something to you. Here's what will solve your problems. Here it is. And yet it doesn't. It doesn't. It doesn't quench the thirst, doesn't satisfy the hunger. Man's appetite is never filled. Now, why is that? Why is it that you can't find, why is it that it's impossible for you to find something in this world to satisfy you? Ultimately, I believe it's because we were designed, we were made to find our joy and our satisfaction in the infinite God. We were created to find satisfaction in the one who has infinite glory, infinite beauty, infinite wisdom, infinite power, infinite love. And compared to him, compared to such a God, even the best of what this world has to offer you is just empty. It's like trying to find beauty in a little trinket at the souvenir shop when you're comparing it to the finest diamond in all the world. And of course, the great problem is that though the only one who can satisfy us is the infinite God, the problem is that through our sin we've cut ourselves off from God. Through stubbornness and foolishness, we've turned our back on the one who can satisfy us. And we run from him and turn our attention on all these other little trinkets that the world holds out. We plunge ourselves into this vain and empty existence. And the point is that we're not too different. In fact, we're not any different from those tragic examples that were mentioned earlier in chapter 6. Here were two cases, and it was impossible for them to satisfy themselves. And everyone looking on would agree. They can't satisfy themselves. One has the goods but can't use them. The other can use the goods, but he doesn't have any. They can't satisfy themselves. It's impossible. And we agree. Such a life, it's vain, it's empty, it's just restless and painful. And then Solomon's telling us here, we're all like that. None of us have the possibility of satisfying ourselves. None of us can, in this world, rise above this restless, vain life. That is, none of us can, if our eyes are just fixed on the world around. The preacher's point of view here is that you might have some goods, you might even have power to use those goods, but even still, even if you do use them, you're not going to get any closer than the other examples. You're going to do no better than them at all in putting an end to the restlessness and emptiness of your existence. In verse 8, the preacher emphasizes that the wise man doesn't get any closer to satisfaction than the fool. Nor is the answer found in trying to live the simple life, because the poor person does no better than the noble who knows how to walk before the living. High or low, rich or poor, wise or foolish, you can't find satisfaction in this world. Dissatisfaction guaranteed. In verse 9, the preacher says something very like our proverb about the bird in the hand. Better than two in the bush. It's worth two in the bush. He says, better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the desire. He's saying better if we could find joy in the things that we have, rather than our desire, our soul, as the word literally is, rather than our soul always wandering after the next thing. That would be much better if we could just find joy and satisfaction in looking upon the things that we have. The problem is that we don't. And we can't stop our desire from wandering. We're restless. We're unfulfilled with the stuff of this world. And all of this then leads finally to the vanity of life for all of us in light of this dissatisfaction. The vanity. From verse 10, the preacher brings us to a conclusion, and he really sums up the state of man. He says, that which hath been is named already, and it is known that it is man. Neither may he contend with him that is mightier than he. Now, this is like many verses I'm finding in Ecclesiastes, this is another one that's quite hard to interpret. There are quite a few different ways that this verse has been taken. My basic understanding of it is essentially, it's talking about man, saying man has always been the same. He's been named from the very beginning. And what is that name? Man. That is Adam. Adam. That's a name that really is derived from the dust, from the ground. The point being made here is that Adam or man has always been a frail creature of the dust. That's all we are. That's what men have always been, certainly since the fall. We've always been frail and dying. And then we're told that we can't contend with him that is mightier. Now, some take that to refer to God. Certainly he is the one mightier than us. Some take it to refer to death. None of us can contend with death when death comes knocking. Either way, I sort of take it along the same lines of both of those. We can't contend with God when he would bring our life, our frail lives, to the end, to their death. We can't contend, we can't prolong our existence forever, and we're weak to help ourselves in it. And so the preacher here, he describes this empty existence of all of us as we run from this thing to that thing to the next thing, always pursuing the next mirage in the desert, always thinking that will put an end to the restlessness, to the dissatisfaction. And then we're being reminded here in verse 10 that at the end of it all, we're only men, we're only creatures of the dust. We can't contend with the mighty God when he would bring an end to our existence. We can't contend when death itself would come knocking on our door. And therefore, ultimately, we're going to be brought down to the same condition as that child who died in the womb. We have this long, empty existence, and finally brought to death. And since that's the case, as verse 11 says, seeing there be many things that increase vanity, what is man the better? The preacher's saying to us here, how are we better off? How are you better off? If you've set your eyes on certain things and you thought they would fill your appetite, but they didn't, and then you were looking for the next thing that would, and it didn't, and then you kept doing it and nothing satisfied, and it's just this long, restless, dissatisfied existence, and then at the end of it all, you're brought to the dust. You're brought down to death. What are you the better? We could say, what is any man better than that child who never saw the light of day? It had rest. It had peace. And here you are feeling empty and weary and getting no closer to satisfaction. In fact, you have no idea even what would be good for you to really meet your needs in this world. Is that your experience summed up in verse 12? He says, who knoweth what is good for man in this life? Who knows what the answer is in this life? Who knows? Who can provide it? No one. He says, all the days of his vain life, which he spendeth as a shadow. Preacher says here that if you're caught up in this kind of living, always looking for satisfaction in this world, you're living your life as a shadow of what it ought to be. You've never really begun living. You have maybe the illusion of life, You might think that you're doing better off than that child who never saw the light of day, but your existence is just a shadow. You've never really begun to live, and you're ultimately brought down to the grave too, after a long, weary, restless life. And I wonder, does that describe you tonight? It's as if you're living in the shadows, striving for something that'll give meaning and substance to your life, but just not finding anything. Restless, pushing on with frustration and emptiness on your slow march to the grave. You know, the answer for you, the answer for me, is for us to look away from this world that has already given us so many empty promises. The answer for us is found in the gospel, which the Lord presents to you in his word. As we said before, the reason for this empty, restless existence is because we were designed to find our satisfaction in the infinite God, and everything else is just a cheap trinket compared to him. And yet, though we are meant to find satisfaction in him, in the infinite one, your sin has cut you off from him. And you have no way by yourself to get back to him and to satisfy your soul in him. You have no way to come again and to enjoy renewed fellowship with God. You have no way to know again his presence and his favor and the life that is found in him. You can't achieve those things by yourself. And yet the Lord gives you the answer in the gospel. Our God points us to the Savior, to Jesus Christ, to God himself, who came to die and to bridge the great divide between God and men. We're pointed in Scripture, in the gospel, to the perfect one, who came and suffered on the tree of Calvary, who opened up a highway upon which you can come to God. Christ said himself in John 14, verse 6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. And of course, what's implied there is also the opposite, that we can come to the Father through Christ. It is Christ, and only Christ, who can bring us to the fountain of all satisfaction and joy. It is Christ, and only Christ, who can bring us again into fellowship with our triune God, with our Maker, with our life giver. And so you can ignore the gospel and ignore Christ and continue trying to find something in this world that can't be found. Something that will give you satisfaction. And you'll never find it. You can push on with a restless, empty, shadow existence. Or you can turn your attention away from the foolish things of this world and set your eyes upon Christ. Look to the one who gave his life for lost sinners, the one who offers you fellowship with himself, the one who says in John 6:35, I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger. He that believeth on me shall never thirst. You can look to him and leave the shadow life behind. Leave behind the restlessness and the dissatisfaction and step into the light and know the joy that only the Lord can provide. And by the way, let me just stress, if you're a believer, we're not just talking to the unsaved here, because so quickly the believer, the child of God, can get our eyes off Christ and we get distracted, and that's where sadness and dissatisfaction and restlessness and sorrows come in again. Get your eyes back upon your Lord. Get your eyes back upon the altogether lovely one. You're designed to find satisfaction in him. Isaiah 57, verse 20, warns us that those without the Lord are like the troubled sea when it cannot rest, whose waters cast up mire and dirt. There is no peace, saith my God, to the wicked. No peace, no rest. And yet, if you'll turn to the Lord, if you'll walk with the Lord and look to the Lord and find your joy in the Lord, Psalm 107 verse 9 would encourage you. It promises, he satisfieth the longing soul and filleth the hungry soul with goodness. With this world, the label has to read, dissatisfaction guaranteed. Different with the Lord. coming on to God through faith in Christ, walking with him, I can tell you, on the authority of God's promise, you'll find the label there: satisfaction guaranteed. May God bless his word to us. Amen.